I just want to say hi, everyone, and thank you for joining me today for this post-intake review 2025, the latest fraud trends targeting UK universities. In this session, I'll be sharing the latest insights from Qualification Check following the close of the September intake. This session is part of our ongoing webinar series to help keep universities informed about fraud trends that we're seeing across UK admissions, including both new risks and emerging and any positive signs of improvement. I'm doing it now because the dust has just about settled on the main admission cycle. So it's a good moment to pause, reflect and see what's happening. And most importantly, how these findings can help you prepare for the 2026 intake. Now, I'm just taking a little pause because I can still see some comments that people can't hear. Can people hear me now? If anybody can pop a comment in, that would be really helpful. Thank you. I'm just going to check. I'm not getting anybody saying that they can't hear, so I'm going to make an assumption that you can hear, and I'll keep going. But if I see any more, I'll just take a pause again. So I'll just go back. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Rachel Wells, Head of Global Accounts, responsible for customer success and account management. I work closely. Brilliant, thank you. You can hear me now. Great. I work closely with our university partners, supporting them to strengthen their verification and compliance processes, and to help them make informed, data-led decisions that can help protect their institutions from fraud during the application process. I know there's quite a few of you on today. Some of you I know and some of that you don't know. So please do say hi in the comments, and thank you for letting me know about the sound issues. Please also feel free to add comments or questions as I go along. What I'll do is I will try and answer them as I go. But if not, there'll be the Q&A at the end. In terms of an agenda, over the next 30 minutes, we're going to be taking a look at an overview of recent fraud trends and the common fraud types flagged through our platform during this period. We'll look at an analysis of some of the countries where we're seeing application fraud coming from and why. And I'll also quickly look at a case study, which is an example of an evolving fraud technique that we're seeing and what your teams can look out for. Before I start on the data, though, I just want to cover very quickly how we get our data. So when we're doing verification checks, the data comes directly from 53,000 trusted sources across 195 countries that are set up on our platform. We use 3 primary verification methods. The first is direct data integration. So where possible, we connect directly with primary data sources such as student record systems or official in-country national databases. That allows us to get sub-second, almost instant checks. The second is via automation through our secure portal access. So approved staff at authorised institutions can verify qualifications directly within our platform via automated links that we send out to them. And the third is our sort of operational research teams on the ground, so our in-country teams who manage verifications that require local liaison, document handling, and the more manual processes. Within these teams, we also have sort of local language specialists that cover sort of globally, wider field. Every verification is supported by quality assurance, ensuring accuracy and reliability. That's obviously very crucial and key. And it's also worth noting at this point that all of the data that you're about to see is from consented checks. So that means applicants have given their permission for the verification of their qualifications to be carried out. And what the data doesn't show, though, is the deterrent effect carrying out these checks has. So our CTO actually put it really nicely this week, that we can prove how many fraudulent cases are caught, but not how many are being prevented. It's a bit like a burglar alarm. You can count the number of times it goes off, but it's far harder to measure how many intruders were deterred simply by seeing it on the wall. So having processes in place, however that may be, is a really good deterrent effect. Now, moving into the data, The first thing we're going to look at is the data from July and August year on year. So back in July, we presented the previous months. This data has not yet been seen. We've excluded September from this view as some data is still being finalised. A few of our partners extended deadlines and verification requests came in later than usual. But once all that's complete, we'll send out a short report with the full roundup to everyone that's on this webinar. But I didn't want to delay. I wanted to share this view with you now because I know many of you are already starting to plan for the next cycle and reviewing your own processes. So this felt like a good time. In terms of the headlines, looking at this data, the fraud rates have generally increased year on year. If you look from sort of July to July between 2024 and 2025 in August. But the main standout theme is that this year fraud rates increased between July and August across almost every country as the deadline dates approached. So we saw this last year to some extent with 3 out of the 9 countries presented here, shown in red on the left-hand side. But this has now increased to 7 out of 9. And it's likely driven by fraudsters leaving submissions until the very last minute, knowing that at peak times, your admissions teams are working at full capacity, document volumes are at their absolute highest, and they're assuming that checks will not be done as thoroughly, if at all, because essentially they're banking on you being under too much pressure and timing their submissions to try and slip through unnoticed at the very last minute. I don't think that's necessarily new, but we have certainly seen it a lot more and hearing it a lot more this year from our partners. If we take a quick look through the data country by country, so Bangladesh, we've seen a sharp rise, which could be linked to agent-led submissions and duplicate documentation. We are seeing recycled, so to speak, documentation across multiple applicants. So they're using the same document and just simply changing the name, which tend only to be picked up by admissions teams when they come in at the same time, or the same admissions officer happens to see them, or by pure luck, as sometimes referred to by our partners. Canada saw a small but noticeable increase, which could be connected to international applicants falsifying grades last minute to try and enhance credibility. Again, because sort of closer to deadlines, may have tried elsewhere and now trying and inflating their grades. The increase in China fits a pattern we've seen where organised networks ramp up activity there late in the cycle. And we've also seen a rise in edited transcripts from applicants or their agents more last minute. Ghana went to 7.59, which actually is interestingly a drop, although they're still one of the highest in terms of a percentage. Somebody just asked if it's recorded. Yes, it will be. I'll be able to make it available. Ghana was a drop, although they're one of the highest. So applicants, we do tend to see that they kind of submit earlier on in the process with Ghanaians. For India, another encouraging decrease, aligning with the trend when we presented the data back in July. But as I'll come on to, fraud levels remain high in volume terms, as they're still very much one of the top sending volume countries. So the actual number of fraud cases has increased, although that percentage has shown a small decrease. Nigeria has increased and is still one of the highest overall, showing potential continued organised. We see a lot of organised fraud and coordinated attempts coming from Nigeria. UK, much like Canada, so a small but notable increase with a focus on no student records being found. I'll come on to that a bit more later. And finally, the US, there was an increase there, where the spike appears to be tied to fake documents being used by overseas applicants. So I guess the key message from this table and looking at this data is that end of cycle months are increasingly high risk when you're already under the most pressure. So fraudsters are leaving it very much last minute. Moving on, what I'm going to do next is look at year on year in terms of the overall trend. But before I do, a couple of important things to mention. First, although this chart shows percentages, the underlying data volumes have risen in some areas significantly. This is partly driven by some recovery in application numbers last year. And also there's been a much wider use of our checks, so our data's gone up a lot. The second to mention is, while deterrence is hard to measure, the pattern is consistent. whether it's looking at our data or feedback from partners, is that when you do run clear, rigorous and consistently applied verification processes of any form, ours or whatever it may be, behaviour just start to shift. So word spreads amongst the applicants, the agents, whoever it may be, opportunistic attempts fall, and fraud rates tend to stabilise or decline year on year, which will have had some influence in the trends in this data. But even so, in terms of the fraud rate movement, if we look, Bangladesh, Ghana, Nigeria, and the US have seen some increases, and all other countries have either stabilised or seen a decrease in their fraud rates as a percentage. Going to quickly do a kind of run through each. So looking at each country, Bangladesh is a very slight increase in fraud rates. So the overall numbers are smaller than some of the other countries, but do indicate the fraud levels are rising in line with growing applicant volumes. In Canada, the fraud rate has dropped year on year, but given the size of the market, the number of fraudulent cases continues to rise. And this likely reflects wider verification coverage. I'm going to go back to Canada. I'm just looking at my China notes. For Canada, the fraud rate has dropped, but the total number of checks behind the data more than doubled, meaning the absolute number of fraudulent cases still increased. For China, fraud rate has decreased, with the fraud rate more, but given the size of the market, the number of fraudulent cases continues to rise. This likely reflects wider verification coverage rather than the decline in fraud attempts. For Ghana, there's a sharp rise with the fraud rate more than doubling year on year, and this points to a continued emerging risk area, possibly driven by an increase in unaccredited institutions and fake certificates that we're seeing. For India, the fraud rate has fallen, but India remains the largest sending country, as I said before, so overall fraud volumes are still high and increasing. What this data doesn't show also is the separate trend that we're seeing at undergraduate level, particularly around India Standard 12 certificates, where we're seeing a noticeable rise in activity amongst our partners there. So UG in India is something that's emerging. Nigeria, fraud rate has risen and is the highest of all of the countries that we're seeing in this table. The growth in fraud is outpacing overall verification volume, which could signal organised networks. We see quite a lot of that in Nigeria. For Pakistan, the fraud rate has come down, even though verification volume behind the scenes has more than doubled. And this suggests a positive shift, possibly due to increased institutional awareness around verification processes following, we previously uncovered some fraud exposure at a couple of institutions last year. In the UK, a slight drop in fraud rate as a percentage, despite a large rise in total volume. Again, meaning the absolute volume of fraud has increased from applicants claiming to have studied in the UK or have UK qualifications. And in the US, there's an increase year on year, albeit very subtle as a percentage, but we are seeing more forged US degrees and transcripts amongst international applicants. And this appears to be driven by the more fake online universities and diploma mills marketing really aggressively to overseas students. But we also believe it could be linked to English language requirement fraud. So as applicants kind of assume that if they present a degree from US, maybe even UK, Canada, sort of other native English speaking countries, that it will automatically satisfy English proficiency criteria and help them to bypass the additional testing or document checks that you'd need to do around English language. So we think that's possibly why that's happening. Next, I'm going to move on to fraud rates by country, or it's actually more onto the types of fraud that we're seeing. But before I do go into the specific countries again, I want to start by looking at the types of fraud we've seen most often during this intake and how these compare to the patterns that we shared back in July. So very quickly, first, three categories continue to dominate. So forged or altered documents accounts for about 40% of all fraud cases. So that's consistent with what we saw in July, but the methods are evolving. So we're now seeing far greater use of digitally enhanced certificates and transcripts. With AI-assisted editing tools, applicants are using them to recreate templates, content, signatures, QR codes, all that look completely legitimate at a glance. And several of our university partners have commented that these new forgeries are so much more convincing, particularly once printed or scanned. It's making visual inspection almost impossible. The second is no student record, which is now accounting for about 21%. These are cases where the awarding body tells us that no record of the student or the applicant has ever existed. So in other words, the individual was never enrolled in the institution that they claim to have attended. Complete fabrication. The third is incorrect grades, which now makes up 20% of all fraud cases. So this is up sharply from our last review. In these instances, the qualification itself is genuine and the person did genuinely study at the institution, but the grades or the classification that they're presenting has been altered, presumably to improve their profile. So while the qualification type and individual are legitimate, the intent is to gain unfair advantage, effectively cheating their way onto a course ahead of applicants or to meet the kind of minimum criteria, grade criteria to get on. And this ties in with the last minute fraud attempts we tend to see towards the end of the cycle. Perhaps they've applied elsewhere and been rejected, so therefore they're coming to you now and they're altering their grades as a hope that that's going to get them in. Quick fire round as we go through the countries. So in Bangladesh, what we've seen is a vast majority are confirmed as outright forgeries, and 13% were incomplete studies where applicants attended but didn't finish. Why do we think this is happening? Well, it could be a number of reasons, but including things like Bangladesh's private college sector is loosely regulated, making it easier for document sellers to operate. In Canada, around 57% of forged documents and 43% incomplete studies. It's important to note with Canada that many aren't actually Canadian nationals, rather international applicants claiming to have studied in Canada. And we think this is happening because a Canadian qualification gives the appearance of English proficiency again. So it's used as a shortcut to bypass the English language requirements. Several institutions have also confirmed that the students had never actually entered Canada as they were unable to produce a national ID card or study permit. So it's worth noting that if anyone who has genuinely studied in Canada were told these, so if they can't provide one, it's almost certain that they never attended a Canadian institution. In China, it's kind of like a almost even split. We've got 40% incorrect grades, 32 no record, 26 forged documents. It's a more rounded pie. But why we think this is happening? Well, increased competition for PG study in the UK's top universities. That's where we're seeing a lot of the fraud happening. And we're also seeing a lot of the sort of embellishment of grades and GPAs, and they're altering their transcripts to meet the conditional offers. In Ghana, 81.6% is forged documents. In Ghana, the university is explicitly confirming fake forging. We sometimes find in some countries they're a bit more polite, but in Ghana they've been quite heavy in this is definitely fake, definitely forging. Could be down to economic pressures. As I mentioned earlier, there's a growth of unaccredited institutions offering fake certificates. But these are the trends that we're seeing in Ghana for you to take away. In India, sort of nearly 80% of forged documents are similar levels to what we saw in Bangladesh and Ghana. And we're also seeing, as I mentioned before, a rise in fraud at undergraduate level, particularly around India Standard 12 certificates. Why is this happening? Well, for UG admissions, the pressures intense. Families are spending heavily on agents promising a UK place. So it's not always the applicants that are creating these forgeries. It's often agents that we see as well. Nigeria, 63% forged at all, and 13% in incomplete studies. What's happening in Nigeria? Well, fraud networks are becoming more organised. We even see document vendors now operating by things like WhatsApp. The UK universities in Nigeria are also viewed as a good migration pathway, so the incentive is really high. In Pakistan, the vast majority confirmed fake or fabricated, with a small share with mismatched data and other. Why is it happening? There's a rising outbound student numbers to the UK, particularly after visa restrictions elsewhere. We're seeing a lot more Pakistani applicants coming to the UK. And reports also suggest some applicants may attempt to use falsified documents in asylum-related claims after arrival. So they're using false documents to get in and then claiming asylum. In the UK, the most frequent pattern is name matching record in institutional systems, with 20% flagged as fake and 5% other. Why is it happening? Well, growth in domestic qualification fraud, especially we're seeing amongst mature or overseas returning students, applicants, as part of the reason. But it could also be to do with what we were saying earlier about the English language. In the US, dominant theme is no student records, especially at the most well-known universities. So we do see that, big names coming up. Why is it happening? Well, again, applicants use fake US degrees to appear stronger or to bypass the English language testing. And for many, an American degree equals English proficiency, so they believe it removes the need for additional testing. There's also a perception that the US is a lower or low risk market, making them a safe option. They think that you're not going to check their qualifications coming from the US. So that's just some of the common themes. Next, I'm going to move on to the case study that I mentioned at the start, that demonstrates an evolving fraud technique. Some of you might remember that I raised this topic briefly in our last webinar, when we'd seen suspicious QR code activity linked to a particular institute in India's Punjab region. At the time, we had a partner that seemed to be particularly targeted, but the investigation we did ultimately revealed thousands of fake degrees being issued through a counterfeit website that redirected users to what looked like a genuine verification portal. The same branding, same format, looked incredibly real, but none of it was real. Since then, we've seen more reports of similar activity, and most recently, a new undergraduate case involving a large number of the India Standard 12 qualifications showing the same warning signs as cropped up. So this isn't something that's going to go away. It's very much an ongoing and evolving problem, now appearing across multiple qualification levels and regions and countries. We're seeing a lot more of it. Before I talk about how QR code fraud works in practice, it's important to understand the broader trend that we're seeing. So there's been a clear shift from traditional document forgery. Gone are the days of Tipex and simple computer sort of editing programs. It's a sophisticated digital deception that's happening now. So we're seeing AI-assisted editing tools used to replicate certificates, as say content, signatures, and institutional layouts with near perfect accuracy. Then they're going away, they're recreating the university websites, the portals, making everything look very kind of connected, well joined up. We're seeing a rise in cross-border digital qualification fraud, so especially in regions without centralized verification systems, because they think it's easier to get through. And we're also seeing that under the pressure of tight admission deadlines, genuine looking digital fakes are slipping through initial checks. So again, just to kind of be aware and warned of that. So what is QR code fraud and why does it matter? So more and more institutions are relying on QR codes as a quick way to confirm document authenticity. They're fast, convenient, they look modern and secure, which is exactly why fraudsters are exploiting them. We've seen the QR codes redirect you to fake verification pages, some linked to tampered databases showing fabricated results, while others go to websites that look genuine and university portals. But the key point to remember is the QR code only verifies what's on the page it leads to. It doesn't confirm what the source itself is genuine, and that's the gap that they're exploiting. So you've got to be really, really careful of that. So what I would suggest is be cautious of any documents that rely solely on a QR code for verification. Always check where the QR code leads before trusting the results. So where possible, go back to the source and just make sure it's absolutely genuine. But if you'd like to dig deeper, there's some other stuff that I've written about in terms of kind of data protection and consent requirements and the challenges with QR codes on that as well. So there is a blog post on our website that you can go away and have a look at, or if anybody would like the link, I can send it to you after this. I'd be interested as well if anybody uses QR codes, whether you want to drop it into the notes, see how many people are using them. But as we draw to an end, some quick key takeaways. one is first, primary source verification. However you choose to do it is still absolutely essential. So visual checks alone just can't keep up with the pace of the sophistication of these digital deceptions that we're seeing. The second is fraud isn't confined to so-called high-risk countries. This year's data has really driven home to us that no country is fraud-free. And we've seen fraud coming from places you wouldn't necessarily expect, and not covered today, but UK and USA, for example, are ones that are typically thought of as safer. So universities doing their checks well are the ones that are taking a global data-led approach and not making assumptions based on geography. And finally, collaboration really is a differentiator. So institutions seeing the fewest issues and the fastest turnaround times are the ones who treat fraud prevention as a shared responsibility. So they're talking regularly between admissions teams, other universities, verification partners, contacts in the market, and they're all sharing updates about trends, changes, new applicant behaviours, things that they're seeing. And so collaboration turns verification from a tick box exercise into something much more strategic. And that actually brings me to the last slide for QCHE. QCHE was created last year to make that collaboration a lot easier, a space where universities, partners and non-partners can come together and share insight, access emerging data, and learn from each other's experiences. So it's an event that will be taking place on the 11th of February in London next year. It's set to be bigger and better than last year. We'll be sharing more detailed data and insights, expanding the interactive elements to help facilitate data exchange or insight exchange between those that are coming. And we'll be welcoming some external speakers. So check your inboxes for some more detail soon, or feel free to reach out to me directly to ensure you don't miss out. We've only got a couple of minutes left now at the end with the sound issue at the start, and I've talked a lot longer than I was anticipating. But does anybody have any questions about what they've seen now? You can either put it into the chat now and I'll try and answer them, or I can come back to you after the webinar. Just give a minute if there's anybody that would like to ask anything. No? Well, thank you all for joining me today. It's been great to share these insights with you, and I hope that they really help you understand what we've been seeing and help you benchmark your own process and plan ahead with confidence. If you'd like to continue a conversation or would like some more information on anything, then please do reach out to me. My email is on the screen. But thank you very much, everybody, for attending, and I hope you found it really useful. Thank you.